And but also there's something else, and that is it's a balance. In most places in the spring is when people are not always around for 6 weeks, and it's hard to do a 6-week commitment, which is why JLI does the 4-week thing. The problem is if there's a 4-week course and you're going to be missing one or two of the lessons, people are less likely to sign up because miss 1 week out of 6 weeks. That's like miss 1 week out of 4 weeks, a little more difficult. So a lot of things that come into play. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to, is it recording or not? I think it is. Yeah. Welcome to Decisions of Fate. And just one word before we begin. I believe that the next 4 weeks, the topics we will cover are going to be topics that the average person, and I would imagine most of us here, have encountered or will encounter during our lifetime, whether ourselves, immediate family, or very close, distant family or friends, which inevitably means that it's not just a Torah-based intellectual conversation. There can be emotions involved as well. And everything you will hear is coming from an intellectual place. And so if there's something that involves a personal either question or dilemma about the past, present, or future, it has to be addressed in that context, not in the context of the class where we're talking primarily philosophical or intellectual. 8:30, or maybe even at a later time when yeah. But there's another point I want to make when we're addressing these topics, when we're getting into this subject matter, and that is one of the first things that I tell hospital or hospice administrators when they ask me as a rabbi what they should know about Jewish care or the Jewish patients that come in. Now, admittedly, I don't know most of the patients that will come, and I imagine many of them aren't going to be doing this. But if they're asking me in an ideal world, when a Jewish patient comes into the hospital, he's coming with his rabbi on speed dial, especially if there's a serious, significant issue at hand. And that's very odd to hospital staff, to healthcare people. Usually they're accustomed to clergy coming when the doctors have nothing left to say and it's the end of life. Whereas Judaism has a lot to say on medical care, and I will have a rabbi that's not my regular rabbi because he's not as well versed in medical stuff, but there are organizations and rabbis that are very well educated and well versed in the medical field and have close contact with doctors that they consult with. But also the rabbi will be able to, I'll be able to hand the phone over to the doctor, and the rabbi will be able to talk to him on his level to a certain degree. Obviously, the rabbi isn't as educated, but knows enough to have a conversation with the doctor. And that plays two parts. The first thing is it helps the rabbi come to a determination what Judaism would say about a specific issue. But it also provides a little advocacy for the patient. I can't tell you how many times doctors have pretty much closed the door on care. The rabbi gets on the phone, and it turns out that the patient with a little pain medication would be able to undergo some of the treatments that the patient and family adamantly refuse because of how painful it is. And no one even thought of saying, well, maybe we can add some pain medication to relieve some of that pain, and just simple things like that. But I think what we should all keep in mind during these classes is, unfortunately, anytime someone has to make big decisions that affect life and death, especially if it's not for yourself, but for a loved one, many times the person will eat themselves up for many years afterwards if they made the right decision or not. And one of the benefits of having a Torah view on how to do these things is that you can leave the decision making up to the Torah. And because whatever decision you're going to make, even if you won't agree with the Torah's decision and you'll regret whatever decision you make, because what if it could have been different? Now, I'm not saying every person is like this or in every situation is like this, but all too often this happens. And this is one of the benefits of, as a Jew, of having this education, of knowing what can be problematic, when it might be necessary to reach out to a rabbi, etc. So without further ado, let's jump right in, and we're going to let the video present our first case study of experimental treatments that we will cover this week. Can you hear on Zoom? Perfect.
When Radha Patel first entered the world, nothing seemed amiss. She was a bright-eyed child who had met her early milestones until it came to walking. She went for physical therapy, but her initial progress suddenly slowed dramatically. Soon after her second birthday, Radha was given a brain and spine MRI and genetic analysis. The results were devastating. MLD, metachromatic leukodystrophy.
Metachromatic leukodystrophy, or MLD, is really a devastating condition. It's a single gene disorder. Children are born normally, but in the most severe form of the disease, after a year or so, they start to lose normal function. They stumble, they lose the ability to walk, they're confined to wheelchairs, they have epileptic seizures. And in the most severe form of the disease, 50% of children unfortunately die by the age of 5, and there's almost 100% mortality by the age of 10.
Radha's prognosis was grim. The Patels sprang into action, researching fanatically for a cure in the race against time. Surely, they reasoned, in an era of gene editing technologies, there must be a cure for a single enzyme deficiency. Sure enough, Shire, a biotech company specializing in rare disease solutions, was developing an MLD treatment. But there was a catch. Medicines require extensive testing and collaboration. The good news was that Shire had started the process. Their phase 1 trial delivered the required rudimentary degree of safety and effectiveness. Shire was gearing up for phase 2, a comprehensive trial to complete the process. The bad news was that the second trial would occur in several months' time, and that would be too late. For the drug to be effective, Radha needed it immediately. But the Patels were optimistic. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration runs an expanded access program, also known as compassionate use, that approves investigational stage medication. At the time, the program worked like this. A doctor with a terminally ill patient who had no other treatment options could ask a pharmaceutical company for an investigational drug that had undergone a phase 1 trial. If they agreed, the doctor could apply for FDA's consent. With those 2 approvals in hand, the patient could access the coveted cure. On their end, the FDA simplified the procedure and granted almost all requests. However, getting the companies to agree was another story. Companies need to demonstrate that their products are safe for public consumption. They are reluctant to provide a drug prematurely outside of a clinical trial. What if the patient suffers injury or death for reasons not directly related to the drug? Will that unfairly torpedo their chance of receiving FDA certification? That's a valid concern, which the FDA has addressed, but for some companies, it is not enough. Corporations have another fear. If they freely provide individuals with experimental drugs, they will have a hard time finding candidates to participate in their trials. Put simply, they might save a few lives in the interim, but fail to complete a drug that could save countless future lives. Is that concern valid in a case like Radha's? Certainly not. If a patient with a fast-moving disease is not treated immediately, they will be unavailable for future trials. Radha's doctor asked Shire for the drug. To their dismay, the request was denied, with no clear reason provided. All approaches to the company were rebuffed, and Radha's only hope was dashed. The federal government has since allowed terminally ill patients and their doctors to bypass the FDA.
Good news, in my opinion, actually unadulterated good news. The right to try legislation has passed the House. This bill allows terminally ill patients to try experimental drugs and treatments that may not have received FDA approval.
However, it refuses to force the hands of the pharmaceutical industry, and the keys to life remain in the pocket of individual corporate decision-makers. This leaves us with some dilemmas. Experimental drugs can be highly potent. They have not yet been approved as safe and effective. Is it appropriate to supply them to people suffering from life-threatening illnesses? And if so, under which circumstances? And is it appropriate for governments to compel drug companies to provide access? If so, under which circumstances?
Okay, so I want to just go over some of the sides to this argument. Obviously, we're going to be addressing this from a Torah perspective, so we're not forcing any pharmaceutical companies to do anything unless they come and ask for the rabbi's opinion. But the right to try or compassionate use is deeply controversial. Okay, so what are the reasons why we shouldn't allow patients to try drugs that aren't yet approved?
Basic nature, if they haven't been approved, they haven't been fully tested.
And therefore, what would be the problem? They can be dangerous. What else? Ineffective. Very good. What else? But ineffective isn't perhaps strong enough, but dangerous and ineffective, you're not even getting any benefit from it. Yeah. Okay. What else? What other, not from the pharmaceutical company's perspective, but from our perspective, from the perspective of the government or the people, why would we not want terminally ill patients to have drugs that weren't yet, the option of having them if they're not yet tested for safety and efficacy? Unknown side effects. It might be unnecessary suffering for no good reason. And tied to that is the false sense of hope. It could be this drug is not. No, someone believes this drug could be effective. There's obviously a reason they're testing it, yeah? But it's possible the drug won't be effective at all. And then you've built this family's hope up, and it turns out to be nothing. One of the reasons that, I don't know if you noticed in the video, why wouldn't the drug companies have test patients if they did this? Why are they worried they won't have test patients if they allow their drugs to go out for compassionate use?
They could be sued.
They can be sued. Okay, so the government took care of that. I think, I don't think they could be sued. But one of the things he said is because they'll be worried that they're not going to have anyone for the test for the trial phase. Why not? I didn't know this, but apparently, I mean, it makes sense. Part of the trial phase is that half of the patients get the drug and half of them don't get it. So if you know that if I participate in the trial, I may not even get the drug. But if I don't participate in the trial and I appeal to the company for compassionate use, then I'm going to get the drug. So no one's going to want to sign up for the trials anymore. Right? Yeah, that's a big fear. Okay. What about reasons for why should we be for people having the option at least to use these drugs, even though they're not proven? They could work. Huh? So why can't people choose? Why can't I make the decision if I want to go through the hassle and go through the false hope and go through all the possible side effects and even the risk to risk my life? I'm dying anyway. Why shouldn't I be able to make the decision? And then, yeah, so, and then if you tie it up now, so you'll say, we want to make sure that there's some bodies involved, some people involved, either with government or not, to make sure that it's not dangerous or that it's at least safe to take. this all takes a lot of time. It all takes a lot of unnecessary effort, presumably, that could potentially, take away precious time that this patient might have. Okay, so let's start on page 7. Here. There's 2 exercises here. Number 1, do you consider it appropriate for individuals suffering from life-threatening illnesses to be granted access to experimental drugs that have not yet been approved as safe and effective? So the answer to that question is a yes or no. Do you?
Another answer.
And if yes, under what conditions? Which is depends. Okay, so that would be the depends. And then, are there circumstances under which you believe drug companies should be required to provide access? Which obviously can raise the question between public and private benefit. You know, if I get the drug now, there might be a personal benefit to me, but the public may lose out on the possibility of this drug being developed later. But at the same time, maybe sometimes it won't affect the results. And should that be, whose determination should that be left to? The answer to the first question, does anyone have an opinion one way or the other? If it's appropriate that if you're for a terminally ill patient have access to life-threatening to experimental drugs, is it appropriate?
I mean, there are my daughter was this tall. They were working for experimental.
Okay, so
You know, that wasn't life threatening. She would have lived life. You know, she would have been this tall.
so we'll see as the class goes along. This is the discussion in halacha. It's much more difficult to get an approval to do something experimental that's potentially life-threatening if the person's life isn't in danger. Now, I don't know the details, and that's why competent halachic authorities have to be. But if something's experimental, by definition, that means it's potentially life-threatening because we're playing around with the person's with the genes, with the makeup of the person. So when it comes to experimental treatments, then you ask the question: so how do we get drugs on the market? Okay, I'm not saying it's a problem, but when the person's terminally ill, it's, as we'll see, we're more likely to get an approval to have this drug as opposed to if there's no terminal illness. The likelihood of having that risk factor involved goes up tremendously. Yes, Amy or Scott. Yeah.
So wouldn't part of the decision on this be some kind of standardization of what life-threatening means and what condition?
So that's why, if you came to this course to walk out with definitive answers, the next time you end up, God forbid, in the hospital, what do I do? Yes or no? You're not going to have that in this course because there is no yes or no answer. Because how do you determine what's terminally ill? We're all terminally ill, right? The moment you're born, birth is a terminal illness. So at what point do we say that a person's terminally ill? And what are the risk factors? What's considered risk? We all take risk. You're sitting in this room. There's a risk the roof might cave in, right? But there are certain risks we're willing to take. And so the question is, what's the risk factor? So this is all, we're going to have to unpack it. But before we do, the primary dilemma we have here is how far should we go in our attempt to find healing? And what degree of risk is acceptable in the pursuit of this goal? So we have to begin in text 1 with, are we allowed to heal? Now, you've been here a while, you know, of course, but where do we get this from? So let's look text 1. This is from Maimonides. It is a positive mitzvah to remove any obstacle that might pose a danger to life and to be extremely careful regarding these matters. As it is stated, be cautious and preserve your life. So, biblical mitzvah to avoid danger. However, even though we have a biblical mitzvah to avoid danger, there is a difference between bringing danger onto you and becoming ill. Avoiding danger is a man-made issue. Becoming ill is not man-made. For the most part, it's God-made. It's for the religious person, this is inflicted by God for whatever reason. So if this is a God-made thing, who are we to get involved? Yeah, maybe this is God's wish. And how do we get rid of the illness? We got to pray to God. Let God take away the illness. Now, obviously, we know this isn't the case from a Jewish perspective, although there are certain religions or religious groups, not Jews, that do hold this doctrine. Judaism does not. And however, why not? Why doesn't Judaism follow this? So you'll say, because Judaism's a moral and ethical. No, because that's what it says in the Torah. Anything that Judaism says, it says it because it says in the Torah, not because it's the right thing to do, even though it's the right thing to do because it says in the, but it's not because it's right that we do it, it's because it says in the Torah. Where does it say in the Torah? So we have here text 2a. If men quarrel, have a fight, and one strikes the other with a stone or a fist, and the victim does not die. In other words, he struck him with a blow that could have killed him, but it didn't. But is confined to bed. If the victim subsequently gets up and walks around outside on his staff, the assailant is cleared. In other words, because the blow could have killed him, even if the person dies in a year from this blow, that's considered murder because he died from that blow. But if the person heals, gets up, now he's absolved. He's not a murderer, okay? Because the guy healed from this blow, even though the blow could have killed him. So that's it. He's off the hook. No, he pays only for the victim's involuntary idleness. Right, the person was unemployed for the last year because he was in bed, and must provide for his cure. What does it mean to provide for his cure? Medical bills, right? So we see, says the Talmud in text 2b, the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, he must provide for his cure. This informs us that physicians are granted permission to heal. Okay, so here we have text from the Torah that's proof that God says if someone gets hurt and they're going to die, go to the doctor, and the doctor will heal. Okay, now, the Rebbe pointed out many times that the Talmud is very clear. The doctor was given permission to heal, but the minute the doctor says there's nothing to be done, you're going to die, the doctor was never given permission to do that. So if the doctor says that, then you go to God. You don't have to listen necessarily to what the doctor says. You don't have to believe what the doctor says because God can perform miracles. But as long as the doctor says there's something I can do, God says, you got to go to the doctor. Rashi on this Talmud in text 2c says, why does the verse have to tell this to us? Why does Rabbi Yishmael, the school of Rabbi Yishmael, have to tell us that the doctor was given permission to heal? Rashi says, we do not argue God has struck. Will the physician then go and heal? Now, obviously, the question is, God didn't strike here. Two people had a fight. This was a man-made illness. Okay, that's a different conversation. However, many are of the opinion that when the Talmud says that this extends, so if you look in the Hebrew, in 2b, or look in the Hebrew of 2a, the very last two words of the Hebrew. You see the last two words? Virapo yirapeh. It's a double language. Heal, he should heal. Why does it say a double language? So the commentaries say this includes even if the injury wasn't man-made, but is an illness that came from God. Okay. So now that we established that there is permission to seek medical treatment, yeah, we have permission. So now go back to Maimonides, where Maimonides says that it's a positive mitzvah to remove any obstacle that might pose a danger to life. Now we don't only have a mitzvah to avoid danger, we have a mitzvah to seek medical help. Because we're allowed to. If we're allowed to seek medical help, then you're obligated to. Because if you don't seek medical help when you're sick, that's danger. Unnecessary danger. So now we have an obligation to seek healing. According to some, this includes even an eye exam. Because that's part of healthy living, to be able to see. So there's a biblical obligation to go for an eye exam or to go for your annual checkup to make sure that that everything's in order, to avoid any potential dangers. Okay, that's premise number one. Now, we still need to address the theological question. Yeah, but why is it the case? If God made the illness, why did God give permission to the doctor to heal? Or in other words, why create the illness in the first place? If God's creating the illness in the first place, if there's a purpose for it, why give man permission to heal? So here we have a fascinating story in text 3. When rabbis Yishmael and Akiva and one other individual strolled the streets of Jerusalem, they met an ill man. Rabbis, he asked them, tell me how I might be cured. Do such and such until you are cured, they replied. Who afflicted me, he pressed. God, they responded. You have interfered in an area beyond your jurisdiction, the invalid retorted. God afflicted me, and you advise me how to be cured? Are you not defying God's will? Good question, huh? What is your occupation? The rabbis questioned him. I am a farmer. He replied, this is my sieve in my hand. They pressed further, who created the vineyard? God, came the reply. You interfere in an area beyond your jurisdiction, they countered. God created it, and you are cutting its fruit. Do you not see the sieve in my hand? He rejoined. If I did not plow, trim, fertilize, and weed, nothing would grow. So the trees might the concept might be God made, but I made this vineyard. If not for me, there would be no vineyard. Foolish man, returned the rabbis. Have you never heard the verse, as for the human, their days are like grass, from Psalms? Just as a tree will not sprout without the farmer weeding, fertilizing, and plowing, as you so eloquently said, and after sprouting, it will not live without water and fertilizer, but will die. The same is true of the human body. Drugs and medication are its fertilizer, and the doctor is the farmer. Yes, it's true that we are meddling in God's business, but this is the way God made it. God created the world in a way that nothing is finished. Man has to be involved in the food that he eats, in the shelter, in his health. And sometimes his health goes down the tubes. He needs doctors to get involved. So, when we seek doctors, when we go to the doctor, sure, we're going to the doctor because the doctor will heal us. But why are we going to the doctor to heal us? Because God has given the doctor the knowledge, the wisdom, and the tools through which to heal. So we're thanking God for allowing this process to take place. Sure, it's the doctor, but you better make sure you thank the doctor. The doctor was God's messenger to administer that healing, but ultimately came from God. Yeah, the doctor could have given another person the same medication and it wouldn't have cured him. Why not? Why did it cure you and it didn't cure the other person? Because it's not just the medication, it's God's involvement. Oh, Maimonides takes this a step further, and he explains that medical treatment is a blessing created by God. Text 4. If a person is hungry and eats food in order to relieve themselves from the great discomfort, would anyone suggest that they have abandoned their trust in God? God made me hungry. I'm eating. No. Only fools would posit such a thing. Rather, just as I thank God when I eat for providing me with something edible that removes my hunger and provides me with life and sustenance. By the way, there are people that can eat and eat and eat and never feel full. So the fact that we feel full should in and itself elicit gratitude that this food is satiating us. Some people need a lot of food or types of food that aren't healthy for them. It is similarly appropriate to thank him for creating the treatment I can use to heal my illness. So when people are ill, they ought to pray to Hashem and ask him to grant access to the right doctor and the right treatment that will take care of his illness. And we pray in the Amidah 3 times a day, every day. Okay. This idea that from a Jewish perspective, from a religious perspective, we have of avoiding danger and seeking care for our illnesses. In Judaism, it has a unique defining feature, I think, that distinguishes it from a lot of the world, the secular world for sure, and even a lot of perhaps other religions. I'm not 100% clear on that. In that seeking medical care is not just a right or a choice. From a Jewish perspective, it's an obligation. The underlying theme here is our bodies are not ours. I know it's popular in the world today to say my body, my choice. From a Jewish perspective, it's not mine. My body does not belong to me. It is in my possession. It is in my care, but it's not mine. And therefore, I have no say in what should be done to my body. Now, we'll see there are circumstances under which I might have a say. But for the 99% of it, I don't have a say. Because I have an obligation from the creator of my body to do anything possible to sustain life, to use it to fulfill the mission for which it was sent here. And therefore, text 5, this is taken to an extreme in Jewish law. It is forbidden to hit another person, even with their consent, for we have absolutely no authority over our bodies to permit that they be struck, denigrated, or pained in any way. I had the question, and I didn't see a clear answer from, what about practicing karate, boxing, or things like that? I'm not sure. However, I did see that there are many rabbis that don't allow paintball shooting. Because in these things, self-defense things, or in these things could be seen as life-saving tools. And therefore, yes, someone else may be a little dinged up, but it's to help save lives, to help protect lives. Whereas paintball shooting is just for fun, and you can really get bruised, and it's a real problem. I know I didn't find anything conclusive. I know in most camps, a lot of camps, they take the kids there. I never did it, but a lot of camps take the teenagers for sure paintball shooting. But I came across many papers, many articles where rabbis prohibit this type of game because of this law, because our bodies are not ours. We have no permission to bang them up, even if we consent, even if the other person or if we consent to it. What type of surgery? Okay, so
it involves great pain. It involves the knife and cutting in the skin.
Yeah, but why are you doing the surgery? Oh, and that could depend. In other words, as long as the surgery, so that I don't, that's beyond my expertise at this moment. But from what I understand, that could potentially be problematic. However, any medical surgery, almost any medical invasive surgery, even just getting your tooth pulled or root canal or something like that, could potentially be life-threatening, or could almost any medical surgery would be permitted for this reason. Because yes, you're not allowed to endanger yourself, you're not allowed to hit yourself, but at the same time, we have a biblical obligation to make ourselves healthy, to protect life. So, and we know that sometimes you need to go through a surgery to get that. So that's why surgery would be permitted, assuming the surgery is medical in nature. Now, I'm not addressing the question of if there are risk factors involved, how big the risk is. That will hopefully cover soon.
So it's not life threatening, but it's severely immobilizing.
Let's talk about, let's, we're not gonna directly address it, but it will be, I think, will be self-understood a little bit from the next conversation we're going to have. Okay. So having clarified Judaism's overall approach, that we have an obligation to seek care, page 19. So you answered the question at the beginning of the class, but based on the Jewish approach to health and healing outlined above, do you consider it appropriate for individuals with life-threatening illnesses to turn to experimental drugs that have not yet been approved as safe and effective? Anyone care to share if they have a thought on it?
Because we're talking about something terminal, any chance at all of extending life, then it's permitted, even risk.
Okay. So generally speaking, we laid out two principles, right? We have to avoid danger and we have to pursue care and a cure. Yeah. Those are the two things. Usually, most of the time, these don't conflict. Yeah. However, in a case where a patient is terminally ill, or even if they're not terminally ill, but there's an experimental drug, this can conflict. And in our case study, this does conflict. Because by pursuing a cure, you're engaging in a dangerous activity. So which one supersedes? Do we seek the cure for the benefit of potentially prolonging life at the risk of shortening life? Or do we not engage in that pursuit of cure and shorten the life? Or we're not shortening the life, but the life has no chance of being prolonged. Most of the
If the drug, then the drug is dangerous, you're not sure because you're on phase one. You could shorten some of these. I mean, there is a chance that the drug you're taking is potentially dangerous. I mean, it has not been proven not dangerous.
right.
So you are doing the dangerous.
Yeah. And we'll soon see other scenarios, which in history were quite common, where it wasn't as abstract as an experimental drug, where the risk was very clear in front of the eyes. Usually when we look at life, as, for a healthy person, we look at life as something that's eternal. It's going to last for a long time. Or even if we know in the back of our mind we're getting up there and it might not, but we're not, the door isn't closing tomorrow. We're not expecting death tomorrow. But then there are people that are terminally ill, and for them, life is a matter of minutes, days, weeks, maybe months. There's two terminologies we have to learn that we're going to be using, although I will try to use the English terminology, but I think it would be worthwhile to remember the Hebrew terminology on page 20. Figure 1.1. Chaye means life. Chaye olam, olam means forever. Chaye olam means eternal life. Sha'ah means hour, or like a certain time. So chaye sha'ah would be short-term life. When someone is in a chaye olam mindset, a young or even not so young healthy person, they're living forever. are they going to consider taking an experimental drug to make the skin tone better if there's real risk involved? Probably not. Yeah. But if that person is on death's door and there's an experimental drug that might lengthen their life for a few months to a few years, it also might kill them a few weeks earlier, or even a few months earlier. Might they be open to that treatment? Possibly not all. There are patients that would just accept it and they're not looking to for whatever reasons they wouldn't seek it. But you're much more likely to find someone who's in a chaye sha'ah. He has limited life. The risk he's willing to take is much greater than someone who is chaye olam, who is living for a long time. Why? Why is the person who's on death's door willing to take that much more risk? Why not? What do I have to lose? A few weeks, a few months. Yeah, but I could potentially gain a few years. Isn't that worth it? Now, again, not everyone would accept this, but I think many people would. What do I have to lose? What do I have to lose is a very common phrase you will hear in the societies we live in. What do I have to lose? What do I have to lose usually says that the risk factor isn't as great, or at least compared to the situation, as you might think it is. Either it's not very risky, or even if it is very risky, I'm losing so much anyway, I might as well try my hand. But from a Jewish perspective, this line of thinking isn't valid. Because if life isn't ours, if life is God-given, and therefore every moment of life is precious, so the concept I have nothing to lose isn't true. I do have something to lose. I may lose a few more weeks or months. Now, this doesn't mean the Torah won't allow me to do this. I'm just saying, just taking it from my logical, just coming to my logical conclusion, I have nothing to lose. That statement, I don't have the right to make that statement. I have nothing to lose. And so therefore, there is something to lose from a Jewish perspective, because every moment of life is precious. I'm not dying. I'm not dead yet. I still have time. Where do we know this from? Where do we know this principle from? So we have a law when it comes to Shabbos. We all know that it's forbidden to break things or do laborious tasks on Shabbos. However, in text 6, we have a scenario as follows. If a building collapses on Shabbos and we are unsure whether someone is buried beneath its rubble, we must clear the rubble as a potential rescue attempt. Although such activity is generally prohibited on Shabbos. If we indeed discover a living person, even if they are crushed by debris, to the extent of being mortally wounded, in other words, they're dying, we nevertheless continue clearing the rubble off the victim to allow them to live a short while longer. This person might even be in a coma. They might even be unconscious, but we know they're alive. From the condition of their body, we know they're not going to survive. Back then, it was easier to know that. Today, you'd be amazed at what doctors can do. So today, it probably even more so. But even back then, when there was no doctor around, there was no hospital around, you knew the guy was going to die. You still had an obligation to violate Shabbos, which is a capital offense. Not to save someone's life so that they can keep next Shabbos. They're dying today or tomorrow. But that they should be able to live for another few minutes. That's how valuable, that's how precious the Torah considers each moment of life. So who am I to come and say, or can I come and say, sure, I'm willing to give up a few weeks or a few months for the potential of a few years? I don't know. Now, at the same time, doesn't this same text underscore the preciousness of life? How important it should be to seek a cure that might prolong my life for many more moments? Because yes, we're risking losing a few weeks of life, but we're also risking gaining a few years we otherwise wouldn't have. And if a few weeks can be so precious, can't a few years be even more precious? So, taking the Jewish approach, going back to our case study, which obligation do we grant the primary focus to? Avoiding risk or seeking healing? Do we do Chaye Sha'ah? Do we think about her temporary life? Rada is going to live hopefully for at least another 3 years, right? Because 40%, I think, of patients die by the age of 5, but for sure not 10. Okay, so she still has a few years left. Do we try to avoid all risk and try to at least let her live for those few years? Remember, Judaism doesn't consider the state of the person a vegetative state. The person's alive, they're alive. What the purpose of that life is, we don't know, or we may not know. There's a beautiful story. I see if I can remember the details. There's a Chabad rabbi in California, Rabbi Horowitz. He was diagnosed on his 40th birthday with ALS, which basically means that your mind is in prison in your body. Your mind is fully functional and your body has zero function. And he described walking out of the doctor's office on his 40th birthday with his diagnosis and thinking, what's life? What could be the purpose of such a life? And in the parking lot, he saw, it was an elderly couple or walking, and someone fell and hurt themselves, bruised themselves. And he went and helped them get up and bandaged it, either bring them back into the doctor's office. And it was at that moment that he realized that anyone can, if you look hard enough, you can find something, how to contribute to society. And he has this machine, he can, he type with your eyes, he used to for sure write articles and things that, he couldn't move, but he was able to write Torah thoughts on the week, he would send them out. So that's obviously a unique scenario where the person's mind is there, but the Torah doesn't give any parameters for what type of life is valuable. Any type of life is valuable. So even though Rada might have been in a vegetative state after a few years, there's nothing to say that's not life. And therefore, do we avoid risk at all costs? Or do we say, no, if there's a possibility of giving her the quality of life, of healing her, we have to seek that at all costs. Where do we go? Is there a way to resolve this dilemma? So this question was asked by Rabbi Yaakov Reischer. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He was a rabbi in Germany and France in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Let's look at text 7a at the question he was asked. I received an inquiry submitted by an expert doctor regarding a terminally ill patient. The unanimous medical prognosis is that the patient will die within the next couple of days. However, the physicians suggest that there is a medicine that might cure him, but might cause him to die within a couple of hours of taking it. Is it permitted to administer the medicine? Okay, this is the perfect case study. There's a person, they'll die in a few days. If they take the medication, they can either die in a few hours or live for a few years. My response is that this is a matter of life and death, which therefore requires exceptionally careful consideration. It is necessary to thoroughly review the relevant passages in the Talmudic and Halachic codes. For one who kills a single individual is considered as having destroyed an entire world. And conversely, the act of saving a single individual is considered as having sustained an entire world. Okay, so after telling us how severe this issue is, he goes on to suggest why, at first glance, it should be prohibited to administer the medication. Text 7b, apparently, it should seem appropriate to apply the principle of shev va'al ha'aseh. It is preferable to let the situation sit where it is and make no proactive move, out of concern for the preservation of Chaye Sha'ah, temporary life. This consideration applies even in the case of goisus, which is a dying patient in the final throes of death. The example from the Talmud is, if I come to Roger and I say, Roger, remember the $1,000 I lent you? I want it back. And you say, $1,000 you lent me? Yeah, but I think I paid you back already. And I say, no, but we have no witnesses, there's no document, there's no outside proof. I claim I lent you $1,000, you never paid me back. You acknowledge that you think, but you're almost positive you paid him back. You're not 100% sure, but you think you might have paid him back. You might have paid me back. We go to court. What does the court do? So he said, she said, right? What does the court do? So the court does nothing. Why does the court do nothing? Because if the court takes my position and forces Roger to give me the $1,000, and really he already paid me back, the court just stole from Roger, right? Okay. If the court lets Roger keep the money because he claims he paid it back and really he didn't, I just lost $1,000. So either way, someone's going to steal from someone. But why should the courts be the ones to steal? Why should the court get involved and steal? Yeah, someone's going to lose $1,000 regardless of which way. Someone might lose $1,000 regardless of which way they go. So better the court should do nothing. So the same thing here. Rada, or this patient would have died in a few days. It's possible he would have died in a few years of taking this medication. It's also possible they would have killed him by taking the medication. Better don't do anything. This is a halachic principle. And he says, at first thought, I was thinking to apply this principle here, and we should not administer the medication. However, he then turns to the Talmud and he says, no. During the Talmudic era, there were many heathens who had great hatred towards Jews, and if there was a heathen doctor and a Jewish patient, he would have looked for opportunities to kill him. And by the way, this isn't so far-fetched. After, in the DP camps in Germany after the war, there were many Jews that were reluctant to go to doctors. All the doctors in the German hospitals were all suspicious. And there are accounts of Jews who died in medical care that probably shouldn't have. There was even now recently a doctor in Florida, I think, that a Muslim doctor who's apparently also an imam or something, and there was revealed some speeches that he made just a few weeks ago, basically saying to look for opportunities to kill Jews, and he's a doctor. Okay, so therefore it was practically forbidden, not from Torah, but from a safety, to go to a non-Jewish doctor, because you didn't know he might want to kill you. Okay, comes text A. This is the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan stated, when it is doubtful whether an individual will live or die, and the only physician available is a heathen, whose animosity towards Jews leads us to suspect that he might deliberately kill the patient, so then we do not approach the physician for treatment, because the patient might live. They're not terminally ill. We don't know that they're terminally ill. However, if we are certain that without treatment the patient will die, even if they'll die in a week, and if they go to the heathen doctor, he might kill him today, but he might also heal him. We don't know. So we may approach that physician for treatment. In other words, the Talmud is clear that for the potential of prolonged life, we risk temporary life. The Talmud asks, are we not placing the patient's Chaye Shah, his temporary life, in potential jeopardy? And the Talmud responds, in such a case, the concern for Chaye Shah can be disregarded. In other words, the Talmud is clear that if there's a potential for eternal life, again, eternal life doesn't mean eternal life. Eternal life means that the person can go on and live a healthy life. If that's a possibility, then even though there's a potential for shortening life, but because this person's life as it stands will end, and that's why we're talking about a terminal patient, because this patient will die. So therefore, even if there's a risk of hastening the death, because there's an equal risk, we'll soon see, because there's a chance or a possibility of prolonging life, it's a worthwhile risk-taking. The Talmud, however, questions the basis for the ruling. In text 8b, the Talmud says, really? It's a nice theory, but on what grounds are we permitted to waive the concern? Where did you get this from? Who said you're allowed to waive temporary life for the pursuit of eternal life? So the Talmud responds with proof from a biblical incident. On pages 25 and 26 and 27, I think you have the whole story with commentary. However, we're not going to read that now. I'm just going to give you the synopsis that we need to know. Afterwards, you can read the story in its entirety. But basically, there was a city that was the capital, not Jerusalem, but was the capital of the second Jewish kingdom, the kingdom of the 10 tribes that was in the northern part of Israel, Samaria, and the capital was a walled city. And there was a hunger going on, and during that hunger, the Aramean king came and laid siege on the city, and it became so dire that a donkey's head, I think a donkey's head, it costed like 80 silver pieces, and the excrement of a bird was like 5 silver pieces. That's how hungry people were. And then Elisha the prophet prophesied that the next day there would be salvation. They wouldn't be hungry anymore. No one believed him. I mean, it wasn't possible. However, right outside the city, there were 4 Mitzoraim, Jews with Tzoraas, which many translate as leprosy, but is not really leprosy. But it was a skin condition, spiritual skin condition they had, which if you lived in a walled city would mean you had to go outside the city until the condition healed itself. So these 4 people are outside the city and they're starving. And they say, if we stay like this, we're going to die. That's what happens when you don't eat. Let's go to the Aramean camp. There's 2 options. Either they'll kill us or they'll feed us. But we're dying anyway. What do we have to lose? Yeah. So this is text 9. 4 men stricken with tzaraat lingered outside the city gates. They told each other, why should we sit here until we die of starvation? If we decide to enter the city, we will die there due to the famine in the city. If we stay here, we will also die. So now let us go and defect to the Aramean camp. If they spare us, we will be provided with food and remain alive. And if they kill us, we are going to die anyway. The story continues. Miraculously, they came to the camp and they discovered that there was no one there. A miracle had happened. All the soldiers ran away. So they ate. And then when they double checked for ambushes, they went and told the city. The city came out and it was joyous. Okay. But what is relevant to our discussion is the calculation they made. And the calculation they made is the calculation that Rabbi Yochanan the Talmud uses to determine that it's worth it in the pursuit of prolonged life to risk temporary life, assuming your life is in danger. Okay. My life is going to end anyway. I might hasten it, but I might also prolong it. It's worth it to seek to prolong it, even if it might risk temporary life. Yeah. In other words, the key is the last line there, we are going to die anyway. On this basis, we're able to do this. So this is text 10. This is the conclusion from Rabbi Reischer. If the possibility exists for this treatment to completely cure the patient from his illness, we can certainly disregard the concern for Chayei Shah. This approach has clear precedence in the aforementioned Talmudic case. Consequently, in our case, since the patient will certainly die without intervention, we ignore the certainty that he will survive on his own for a few more days and seize the chance of fully healing him. Now, the above decision notwithstanding, a physician must not take this decision lightly. It is necessary for the physician to weigh the situation carefully, to consult with the other expert physicians in that city, and in case of divergent views, to abide by the consensus of the majority of experts and to procure the agreement of the local halachic authority. However, one thing to point out here is you're allowed to do this. Are you obligated to do this? In other words, the Torah doesn't, we're not speaking about obligation here. Here we're talking about, are you allowed to do it? Am I allowed to jeopardize the momentary life I had for the pursuit of a healthy life in the future? And for that, the Torah says yes. Okay. According to this principle, when we're faced with a choice between temporary life and permanent life, permanent life takes precedence. Now we have to define we have to more precisely define our definitions of what exactly does temporary life mean? How temporary is it? We said the moment you're born birth is a terminal illness. So is temporary mean something like Parkinson's or something that eventually can kill a person, but the person can still live for 10, 20, 30 years? Or does it mean it has to be in the next few days? What's considered temporary life? And then what's considered risk? What's the risk factor? Does it have to be something that for sure can cure, but can also kill? Or does it have to be something that can potentially cure and also potentially, where do we draw the line? How are we defining these definitions? Okay, so to begin with, what is the definition of Chaye Sha'ah? Okay, remember, that is temporary life. And then, how much risk is permitted in such a case? Okay, these are the two things that we're going to spend the next 15 minutes on determining. But we're going to do it, we'll take them one by one. So in the story of the four lepers, we'll call them lepers, the story of the four lepers that we had, they were suffering from hunger. Right? Hunger is a terminal illness. Yeah? There was a hunger, there was no food around. So they already didn't eat for a while, and there was no cure in sight. It's not like food, it's not like those days they had airplanes that can drop food, or you get on a plane and fly somewhere with food. There was no food in the vicinity. They were going to die. Yeah. So it's reasonable, therefore, to conclude that a necessary factor to determine that a person is in the state of temporary life is that he has already been diagnosed with a terminal condition that will definitely lead to death if there's no intervention. Okay? And this is what Rabbi Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of Israel, this is the determination he uses. In text 11, the boundary marking the transition from Chaye Sha'ah to Chaye Olam is not clearly delineated. In other words, there's no clear delineation in the Talmud when a person crosses the line. However, it is logical to assume that as long as we know that the illness is already terminal, regardless of how much time will pass until death arrives, it is considered Chaye Sha'ah. This is a very liberal approach. He's not giving a time limit. It could be 5 years. But as long as we know that this illness will cause death eventually, with no intervention, this person is already in the category of temporary life, and therefore would be eligible to risk his life in the pursuit of permanent life, of long-term life. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Okay. However, most rabbinic authorities are of the opinion that this is not the case. It's not if the person was diagnosed with a terminal illness, but if the person is imminently terminal. In other words, he's going to die soon. The question is how soon. Now, so when we say soon, we know 5 years isn't soon. That every person can imagine. But how soon is soon? Is it a few days, a few weeks, a few months? What's considered soon? How can we quantify this? So we all know the concept of treif. Who knows what treif means?
Within 12 months.
Oh, what does the word treif mean? Very good. Mauled or attacked. Yeah? That's what the word treif means. So this is why there's a perception in the world that kosher meat is healthier, because an animal that is unhealthy, that would have died within a year, isn't kosher. Whereas McDonald's doesn't care to take an animal that's going to die tomorrow and grind it up. Well, who cares, right? But so treif literally refers to an animal that's sick, not because of an illness, but because it was attacked, and its internal organs were damaged and it's going to die. But the same applies if its internal organs are just diseased. It's a diseased animal and it's going to die. This is why we check the lungs and other vital organs after the slaughtering to check if the animal could have survived for 12 months. Okay, so let's look here in text 12. The definition of Chai Isha is not clearly spelled out in Jewish law. This is from Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, who was one of the most prolific, I would say, halachic authorities in Eastern Europe during the early to mid-19th century. The definition of Chai Isha is not clearly spelled out in Jewish law. It is clear that a life expectancy of 1 to 2 years cannot be considered Chai Isha, because if so, what is Chai Olam? 1 to 2 years is considered temporary, then where do you draw the line? What's considered permanent? After all, everyone is mortal, and what difference is there between 1 year, 2 years, or 100 years? Seeing that no one lives forever, are we to categorize all life as Chai Isha, as temporary? Nor does it appear correct to say that Chai Isha only refers to a situation in which the patient will die from the specific illness for which they will presently seek a cure, and not from other ailments. Yeah? What difference should it make what illness will cause the person's death? Rather, it would appear that just as a treifa is defined as an ill person or animal that will not live more than 12 months, similarly, anyone whose illness will prevent them from surviving for more than 12 months has entered the category of Chai Isha. Conversely, if the illness will cause death after only 12 months, the interval is not considered Chai Isha, but Chai Olam. So he's comparing treifa to this case, and therefore, terminal illness is defined a condition where someone is going to die in less than 12 months. So we have two opinions. Yeah. No, it doesn't say 12 months. That's part of the oral tradition. What constitutes a treifa? So we have, on the one extreme, we have Rabbi Kook, who says terminal illness. Rabbi Kluger isn't on the other extreme because there are actually many contemporary halachic authorities that say that it's closer to the weeks to months. That especially today, someone has a year to live. Anything can happen in a year. We don't consider someone is given 12 months. It's not seen, although it's obviously seen as a death sentence, but it's not as imminent as someone who's given a few weeks. Okay, so it does fluctuate. It could also depend on the person. Is the person otherwise a healthy person that the chances of them surviving past the year are stronger? Are they otherwise a sick person? What type of illness is it? There are many factors that can go in for the rabbi determining, but there's a lot of leeway here of what could be considered temporary life. But it's not clear. You see already, it's not clear what's considered temporary life. Now, what about the risk factor? How much risk? So there is no clear consensus what level of risk one may undertake. Some authorities are very hesitant to liberally permit risky procedures because of the reasons we laid out earlier. And they'll say that there needs to be at least a 50-50 chance of it working. Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, he's a Jerusalem scholar, a member of Israel's great rabbinical court. He is today probably from the most noted halachic medical experts. In other words, his expertise in medical halachic dilemmas, he's on the top out there. So he writes like this in text 13. However, this permission to operate is valid only if the chances of life and death as a result of the surgery are equal, but not if, in the majority of cases, the patient will die as a result of the operation. So obviously, if it's 70-30 in favor of the patient, for sure, it's okay. He's saying that even if it's only 50-50, then it's okay, but past it, if it's 49 if there's a bigger likelihood of the patient dying on the operating table, that's not a risk that we can allow. Yeah.
Didn't really. Someone was told they were going. In order to.
Yeah, but that's because the doctor said he's going to die, and there was no potential, even risky procedure left. So yeah, but if the doctor say, here's the thing. We know that illnesses kill people. The Rebbe wasn't saying to ignore the doctor, this illness can't kill you. The Rebbe was saying ignore the doctor, that nothing can be done. Pray to God. But the fact that this illness will kill you, that's clear. This illness kills people. Okay. So the question is, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to give up and say, now my life is over? Or are you going to say, okay, medical field can't heal me, but I could still pray to God. However, Reb Chaim Oizer, who was the last chief rabbi of Vilna before the war, he maintains that even a slight chance of cure is enough. In text 14, it says, when faced with a case in which there is no alternative hope for a patient's survival, we disregard our concern for Chayisha entirely in exchange for even a remote possibility that the patient will be healed. Today, most halachic authorities try to find the middle ground. And they'll say you don't have to go 50-50. However, we also don't allow a 1% chance. There has to be a reasonable chance. Just throwing it out there, what would you consider a reasonable chance for a procedure to be, or a medication that can potentially be deadly, but can potentially heal you? What percentage would you give the healing factors enough to risk shortening your life? What would you say is a reasonable percentage?
For sure, 50.
No, for sure. That no one argues that. The question is, can you do it at even less than that? So Reb Chaim Oizer says, even if there's a small chance, even if there's a 1% chance. But today, most rabbis say are reasonable. What would you think is a reasonable?
I think Judaism takes Congress.
Yeah.
What is the point of that?
That's true.
Judaism doesn't seem to take that into account.
No, but remember, this doesn't equate obligation. We're not saying you're obligated to risk. We're saying you're allowed to. So obviously, we're talking about a patient that wants to go through this procedure at a risk to his life. But you're absolutely right. There is no obligation. This is what I said before. Although our body is not ours, and we don't have the right to make determining thing. We don't have the right to determine. However, when it comes to risking Chayesha, risking temporary life for the pursuit of eternal life, there we do have an option. The question is, do we have an option to risk it or not? Not do we have an option, in other words, to go home and say, you know what, the doctors can't do anything, I'm going home, that's okay, for sure. The question is, am I allowed to risk my life and shorten what remains in order to potentially prolong it? That's what we're discussing here. So if a person doesn't want to go through this because of pain, you're right, the Torah doesn't take in, because that's not a consideration.
How much risk should you be allowed to take if we're going to get below the 50 we'll find is what is the quality of life that you
Afterwards? You're saying if the life you're pursuing, the life that will be extended, the quality of that life?
So let's say you're going to die in a year, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, there was no pain involved during that.
Yeah.
My risk by rolling of the dice changed depending on how much suffering I was going to experience over that.
Yeah, but that's not the risk we're talking about. We're talking about the risk in the treatment or in the surgery. The risk of dying is terminal.
Said when do you go 70-30?
70-30, I'm talking about in now that the rabbi gave me permission, I am allowed to look for options that might shorten my life for the potential of prolonging it. What options? Now I'm in the store. I'm looking at the menu of what's available, of what procedures are available that have this risk factor. What off the menu am I allowed to choose? Now, I see this surgery is 50-50. Okay, that for sure I'm allowed to take. This surgery only has a 5% survival rate. There's a 95% chance I die on the table. There's a 5% chance I go on to live a normal life. Can I take that surgery? Can I take the surgery 30%? Huh? So now you're getting into it. But we're talking about someone who's only going to live within the next, he's going to die within the next 12 months. Now what's not fixed?
Okay, so if he's expected to live within the next 6 months, you might take a 50-50.
Yeah.
If he's expected to live the next 5 days.
Oh, then he'll go. Oh, that's what you're saying. Granted, but are you allowed to do? It doesn't matter how, it could be even a day. Let's say the doctor says I have 24 hours to live, but if I do the surgery now, you might die on the table or you'll live for 10 years. But it's only a 5% chance the surgery will be successful. Right? So in other words, the Talmud says,
If you're suffering, if you care,
no, 1 second. 1 second. I understand. Okay, let me clarify. You're right. All of these considerations are true. However, at this point in the conversation, these considerations are out the window. I'll explain to you why. It'll get to there. But right now, let's take the extreme example. The person's dying in 24 hours. He's in tremendous pain. Okay? If you go to the Talmud, the story of the lepers, that's where we know you're allowed to risk dying on the operating table now, 24 hours before your deadline, in order to potentially live much longer, right? That's how we know this from. The story of the lepers, they had a 50-50 of surviving. Either they would be killed or they'd be fed. It's 50-50. If it was a 95% chance that they would be killed. No, why not? Because they could have been taken as assets to tell them the secrets of the city or taken as slaves. There is if there wasn't a likelihood, the question is was that a consideration? In other words, the terminology they used is what do we have to lose? And in their discussion, it seems like there was reasonable thought that they would be saved, even though it wasn't more than 50%. But it wasn't a 1% chance. So the question is, I know that if a person is dying tonight, in 24 hours, and they're in terrible pain, and the doctor says, I can operate on you now, you'll either die in 5 minutes or in 5 years, I know the person may choose that. But the question is, does Torah allow the person to choose that? Because remember, the Torah only allows me to shorten my life if I may gain life. But at what point do I say, yeah, I might gain life? Is 1% enough to say I might gain life? Or is that just a chance? Is 10%, if the doctor says I have a 10% success rate, or there's a 10% chance that this might work, is that enough to say I'm pursuing eternal life? Because 10% chance means this doctor doesn't really have a lot of success in this procedure. Or it may not be a procedure he ever tried. He may be trying something new, right? But in other words, is that considered a valid pursuit of eternal life? Or is this just a flip of the coin? Well, flip of the coin is 50-50, so that's even better. This isn't even a flip of the coin. So again, we have the two extremes. We have Chaim Oizer, who says, even if there's a 1% chance, you do it, if the patient's terminally ill. We have Eliezer Waldenberg, who says it has to be 50-50. The consensus today amongst most halachic authorities is it has to be reasonable. And it fluctuates between 20 and 35%. I think 25 to 35%. Once you're in that ballpark, I think most people say there's a reasonable chance this could be successful. And then again, it doesn't matter if it's 24 hours or 5 weeks. As long as the person has crossed the line into temporary life, now the person is allowed to choose that treatment. Remember, Judaism does not say your body, your choice. You have to be allowed to pursue it. Do you have to? No. You could decide, you know what? I'm not in pain. I'm just going to die when time's up. You can choose that. But am I allowed to potentially to risk shortening my life for the potential of prolonging it? So it has to be a reasonable suspicion that that it'll be successful. It can't just be a 1% chance that this procedure might work. Even if you were dying in 24 hours, I understand.
Probably, you have to say, what's the point? No matter what the circumstances, what's the point at which you're gonna be willing to do any risk?
So I would think if a person's dying in 24 hours, they would take a much bigger risk. Right, but you're not obligated. No one's we're not saying here that a person has to take the risk. They might, the question is, are they allowed to? Well, if you
Do they have free will?
no, well, if they want to follow the Torah, no, the question is if you're here tonight to hear what the Torah says. So we're talking about someone who, yeah, but the Torah says we have free will to eat pork, and yet the Torah says we're not allowed to. But you still have free will to sin. So taking a life when the Torah doesn't allow it is considered, from the Torah's perspective, murder.
Walking into an enemy,
Yeah.
I would say their chances with violence less than percent. The only chance they got is if nobody would want to touch them with their.
No, but they're not lepers. That's why I said it's not lepers with a condition, contagious condition like we have today. The leprosy of that time that they experienced. Yeah, but
Oh, that's true.
yeah, it's for purity. It's not because they were contagious. That's why I hesitated to use the term lepers, but if I would say mitzoraim, I don't know that everyone would get it every time. So that's why yeah, it's not lepers that everyone would stay away from them.
Say 5%.
I don't know. Back then, the Romans didn't kill all the conquerors didn't kill all the citizens. They killed the soldiers. Maybe they took most people, or many. They took prisoners.
You can't if you wanted to rule the world, you couldn't kill them. You wouldn't be ruled.
100%, exactly.
You had
And besides, here they're laying siege on the city. They have 4 insiders that could potentially, even if they're just slaves, but potentially, I think there's enough room to believe that they would have, if they would walk in with white flags. I don't know that necessarily they would be killed. Oh, so yeah. Oh, a percentage of risk. We don't have a conclusion, but it today most rabbinic authorities will use the terminology reasonable. There's a reasonable. It's reasonable to believe that the procedure will work. What's reasonable? That depends, and that fluctuates between the 25 to 35, depending on the rabbi. No. 1 minute. The reasonable is, how reasonable is it for this cure to heal? It's not reasonable. How reasonable? It's what's the percentage of this cure healing versus killing? That's the question.
the amount of time you would live.
No. But amount of time you'll live because of the procedure or without the procedure? Yeah.
Before you can live 5 years.
Yes.
The procedure only has a 5% chance of working.
Yeah.
You're saying that's unreasonable. I'm saying 24 hours. I'll take any percentage. I'm dying.
I understand.
You're saying no, it has to be something more.
So I'm not saying no because Chaim Oizer says yes. Well, 1 second. So therefore, and that's why it's so important not to come to conclusions there and to call a rabbi, and I'll explain to you why. When you call the rabbi, and the rabbi will interrogate you, everything about the person, everything we know. And the rabbi may say, this person, or you're the one let's say you're the one making the decision. You will kill yourself, not literally, but you will kill yourself for the rest of your life because you honestly believe to take this. If there's a reason for the rabbi may decide under certain circumstances, you know what? Chaim Oizer is a valid halachic authority. It's true, most people don't agree with him, but in dire cases, we could be lenient because there is a valid opinion that says this. But you have to be, just like you have to be a doctor to make such decisions, right? Even if you as a layperson know the medical things, you're not going to make the decision, you're going to want the doctor to. So even if we may know the halachic terminology and the halachic things, we need a competent rabbi that's well-versed in halacha and medicine to be able to determine, are we allowed to be lenient here? Can we rely on the minority opinion? Because again, we don't have the Sanhedrin where the majority overturns the minority and the minority doesn't exist anymore. Today we have a majority minority that's, sort of artificial. It changes from place to place or from generation to generation, and it's not binding like the Sanhedrin. So there's a lot more leeway for a rabbi to come along and say, you know what, although the consensus is this, because of these determining factors, we could rely on the minority opinion because you're definitely not doing something prohibited since there's a minority opinion that says it's allowed. So you can't say it's prohibited. It's just not what we would usually follow. So the only thing we know for sure is this. We know for sure that this girl, in this case study, according to Rav Kook, is terminally ill because she's going to die. But according to most halachic opinions, is not considered terminally ill. Even though in a few years she may be in a vegetative state, she's still not terminally ill. And therefore, it would be problematic for her to risk death at the expense of, for the pursuit of permanent life. However, let's say it was imminent. Let's say death was imminent, again, somewhere within the next 12 months. Another clear thing we have is she would not be obligated to pursue a risky cure. Risky would be anything under 50-50. She would not be obligated to pursue that. That's another thing we know for sure. And that's why we know for sure that although the pharmaceutical companies didn't come to consult with rabbis, if they would come to consult with rabbis, it would be hard to believe rabbis would be able to force them to give up the medication because there are many halachic authorities that would say she's not allowed to take the medication. So how could you force them? Now, if they're asking, are we allowed to give her the medication? Then potentially yes. The question, the determination would be up to her or her parents, if she's a minor. Do I want to take this medication? Okay, so we have a few things. We have, first of all, as long as the patient isn't terminally ill, determined by, let's say, 12 months, then you can't risk ending life early for the potential of prolonging life. Once you're in that time frame, you don't have to. You don't have to risk, and because remember, the person says, I for sure, I have 12 months, I have 6 months. If I go on the operating table, I've got no time. Okay, so a person may choose to have 6 months, then no time. And the person is allowed to choose that. Because he's risking giving up temporary life, a person has the right to hold on to temporary life. However, the person also has the right to risk temporary life, assuming there's a reasonable assumption that he will make it. Again, what reasonable means is up for debate, and that's why it's very important. And remember, if you're going to make the decision yourself, depending on how it goes, you might regret it afterwards, and therefore it's always important to keep a rabbi on speed dial and to consult with the halachic authority when this becomes an issue, so that we don't take the burden on, and we know that we're doing what God wants us to do. It's also helpful to the person making the decision, if it's not the patient themselves, or to the patient, it might be beneficial to their peace of mind and to their sanity in their last few days, weeks, or months, to know that the decisions being made are being made by Torah authorities. Now, what happens If there's no hope, the person has reached the end, there's nothing left. There's no risky procedures, there's no trial drug, there's no nothing. They're dying. What happens then? Can they end their life early? Especially if there's terrible suffering. Next week, we will try to grapple with that. In the interim, I ignored part of this PowerPoint. You can find the PowerPoint, the slides that I took out, and the videos and anything else at myjli.com/decisions. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. God willing. Let me